Let us start the discussion on this year's budget. So what's the headline? One would have expected, given the COVID-19 last year, that the headline, that the topic of the budget would be health. Unfortunately, when you read the budget papers and hear the budget speech, you find that the title of the budget speech would have been land. Now, sounds crazy, but that is what it was, and I'll tell you why I am saying that in a little bit. Expectedly, given the background of what happened last year, the finance minister started off talking at length about the healthcare sector and healthcare infrastructure and healthcare spending. The economic survey that came out a day earlier did exactly the same thing. It had a chapter called Healthcare at Center Stage Finally. So this was pretty heartening to see an economic survey talk about healthcare in detail and the budget starting off discussing healthcare. However, as we went along and looked at heard the finance minister, the questions that kept coming up were rather interesting. However, let me first start by saying what the finance minister said. What she said was that here I give you a health budget of 2,34,000 crores. Now that's a lot of money. Why is it a lot of money? It's a lot of money principally because last year the budget allocation was 69,000 crores. So from 69,000 crores to 2,35,000 crores is a fair increase. And so everybody was excited. There was every television channel started talking about what a grand outlay for healthcare and so on, and that's how the day went by. By the evening, when we came home and started looking at the outlays, then the entire thing unfolded, and that was that out of these 2,34,000, 35,000 is a 1 year allotment to vaccines. It's not in that sense a budgetary allocation. It's a one-time allocation, and I will discuss that 35,000 in a bit. So remove that 35,000. Left with 2 lakh crores. Of that 2 lakh crores, 1 lakh crore belongs to a completely different ministry called Drinking Water and Sanitation. So you are left with 1 lakh crores. Of that 1 lakh crores, then you deduct about 17,000 crores that comes up in the Nutrition Ministry. And therefore, what you have is about 83,000 crores. Compare that to the 77,000 crores that was the revised estimate last year. From 69,000 it went up to about 73,000. So there you are. The health budget is exactly where it was pre-COVID. Wow. Add that 6% inflation and you have exactly the same figure as you had last year, as if nothing had happened. Now that is when we first felt cheated. Because if there was a time to really push health spending, it was today, it was this year. Everybody wanted it, everybody would have been delighted with it, everybody would have been okay with it. But there we were in the worst year that we have seen in living history as far as healthcare access is concerned. We were miserly enough not to raise the healthcare budget by any money. Now to that 35,000 crore rupees. 35,000 crore for vaccination. What does it mean? Where does 35,000 crore come from? Why 35,000 crores? The best estimate that we have is Adar Poonawala's estimate a few months ago, saying that we need 80,000 crores to vaccinate 70% of the population. Now if 80,000 crores is for 70%, then at 35,000 we are covering about 30% of the population. Is that what we want to do?
So that would be about 80 crore people.
So that's 80 crore people. Now we are talking about 30 crore out of 1,000
crores.
Exactly.
35,000 crores for 80 crores, which is about less than 300 rupees per vaccine per person.
So either you are reducing the cost, or you are saying that we are only going to cover a quarter of the population, which defeats the whole purpose of vaccination. What we wanted to see was what is happening around the world, that the state will go and vaccinate everybody, and therefore that did not reflect. So why this 35,000 crores and where from? But what it conveys is the inability of a government to tackle this big pandemic even with giving vaccinations to everybody. And then comes another strange figure, and that is that we will now have a scheme called the Prime Minister's Atmanirbhar Swasth scheme. By the way, the finance minister keeps saying Atmanirbhar every fourth sentence, right? You know, she's talking about whatever and there is Atmanirbhar, and then there is something else and there is Atmanirbhar, without, you know, making any sense of what it means. Atmanirbhar comes into health also. What does the Prime Minister's Atmanirbhar scheme of 64,000 crores cover? It says that we will make 17,000 rural and 7,000 urban health centers, and we will set up 3,448 labs in all districts in the country. Hey, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. And so I go back and check Ayushman Bharat, which was announced 3 years ago. Lo and behold, Ayushman Bharat says the same thing 3 years ago. Only the numbers are slightly different. Ayushman Bharat says we'll set up 1,50,000 centers. We haven't seen any in the last 3 years. We have 64,000 crores to take care of some 17,000. And then the fine print says that this 64,000 crores is for the next 6 years, which means that we are going to spend 10,000 crores a year building 17,000 centers. Now do your maths. We are constructing health centers with some 300 rupees per center. So we will be where we were as far as Ayushman Bharat is concerned. The last bit on health is the allocation to RSBY. This is significant. I want all of you to hear this carefully. There is a scheme that is launched about 15 years ago. It is called the Rashtriya Swasth Bima Yojana, the National Health Insurance Program or scheme. It started off with fanfare. It got a lot of the poor, particularly in the northern states, enlisted. It would provide healthcare cover up to 30,000 rupees with a premium of 30 rupees that also the state would pay. And somewhere down the line we lost interest in RSBY, and while RSBY continued to be on the books, the allocation to RSBY kept coming down till we come to this year's budget. And I look at RSBY and look at it thrice to see whether I needed to change my spectacles or not, and the allocation to RSBY is a grand sum of 1 crore. 1 crore to RSBY, a national. I think it's 1 crore must be the electricity bill of the RSBY officers. It can't be anything else. 1 crore to RSBY. Now, why is this significant? In one office. Now, why is this significant? Apart from this ridiculously low figure, why it's important is the single biggest announcement that comes by way of FDI. I have an audience. The single biggest announcement that comes, nahi Farhan, I mean, come, it's okay, because you have to hear this. The single biggest announcement that is coming, and this is very intriguing. The government announces that we are going to open up the insurance sector to foreign direct investment. Now, you know, I understand if you are not surprised, because for the last 6 years we have been opening up everything to foreign direct investment. The only thing that was left was insurance. We say that insurance sector will now allow 74% FDI, up from 49%. FDI, up from 49%. 2008, and I remember this so well, because 2008, when the UPA government moved this exactly the same proposal, there was huge opposition from both the right and the left. Right meaning today's government, and left meaning a government that never came. And together they ensured that that bill would never pass. The same government today passed that, like every other law, by voice vote.
This will be the complete undoing of LIC.
So very, very important that we will open up insurance to foreign direct investment. It will bring in the standard argument, it will bring in huge foreign technology, it will bring in these big players, it will bring in stability, new business processes, premiums will go down, etc. Why are we talking about opening up insurance today? And now do you see the RSBY allocation in context, that we will, you know, finish off everything that exists and have this grand big market open for foreign players. You see, the context is that India's insurance penetration is about the lowest in the world. We have about 3% of GDP as premiums, which is abysmally low. About 30% of people covered by all forms of insurance, which is again about the lowest in the world. So you have the world's largest insurance market here, and therefore a very lucrative market. And mind you, in the year 2020, the insurance market went up by the highest percentage ever, for obvious reasons. Right? We were all suffering COVID. We all knew that we would get hospitalized. So about a 6.5% increase in the number of people opting for non-life insurance, and about a 9.5% increase in the premiums paid to life insurance firms. So the market really is huge, and that market now has got opened up. The reason I flag this is because if we are opening up this huge market for foreign investment for insurance purposes, yes, the argument stays that it is going to get a lot of the big players in. It will, allow us to access the huge insurance models that exist across the world. But mind you, insurance, like banking, is a very sensitive subject. Insurance is an area which is very prone to very short-term flights of capital. And insurance is a product where a lot of small investors and small people put their savings into. Any vulnerability there is going to really impact the backbone of the economy. A lot of countries suffered because a lot of rich countries suffered when insurance frauds happened. Precisely. We are still struggling with IL&FS and Diwan housing. Now we are going to throw insurance also into that same vulnerable area. And that is an inexplicable move, but there it is. That is the single biggest thing that this budget has given us, because mind you, as I said, it didn't give us any money on healthcare. So that's the top headline. What is the next headline that all of you are reading? The other thing that we are reading, even when we were celebrating Republic Day, the headline of the newspapers did not say that watch these visuals on Rajpath. The headlines of that day said, watch these visuals of farmers protesting at the border. And therefore the second aspect was the farm sector. What does the farm sector get? What does the finance minister say as far as agriculture is concerned? She goes on and on about how this government last year has spent enormous amounts of money on minimum support prices, just to argue that the MSP is not going. That is all. There is nothing substantial in that is being said on agriculture, except that we are giving, historically we have been buying produce at minimum support prices. Why this is important is that the farmers are protesting, saying that if you are serious about MSP, put it down, just write it down. That is all that is there to the farmer protest.
And then back into the money.
That's it. I mean, no, just give if you are the government, just give us the sovereign guarantee. If you want a law, put it in the law. But that the government would not do, and does not explain why it will not do that. Therefore, the conclusion is obvious that it does not want to continue the minimum support mechanism. And therefore, that is all that it says about the single biggest issue that we are all worried about today. Those are the two headline issues, and those are both extremely disappointing. It then goes on to talk about the general issues, and the general issues that I should quickly go over is that the size of the budget is about 35 lakh crores, that India is going to spend 35 lakh crores this year. Now that's a lot of money. It is indeed, out of some 200 lakh crores of GDP, 35 lakh crores is like 17% of the GDP, which is a lot of money. Where do we get those 35 lakh crores from? Here is the interesting bit, that this 35 lakh crores are made up of 12 lakh crores that will come from borrowings. Borrowings. 12 lakh crores out of 35 lakh crores. So nearly 1/3 of the money is going to come from borrowings. It is unprecedented. It's never happened that we have borrowed so much. It is understandable because it is a COVID year. one is not surprised that we will have to borrow that amount of money, but what the budget does not say is where will these borrowings come from. Will all of them come from Indian banks, from provident funds, from insurance companies? And if we are going to sell off LIC, then that money is going to no longer be there for us to play up with. So are we going to borrow externally? My worry is, and that's what the budget does not say, my worry is that this is going to be substantially external borrowings. And external borrowings, just like insurance, are very vulnerable. Because if people call back their debt, then we are in a big soup. So therefore that is one worry. The second bit is that our fiscal deficit, according to the finance minister, is going to touch 9.5% of GDP. Just to put it in context, we've never had a fiscal deficit that is over 4% of GDP. And when it was 4%, we got seriously worried and the sovereign ratings just collapsed. At 9.5%, you can imagine what the impact is going to be. However, there was no choice because it is a bad year and we had to borrow. I still think, and most of us still think, that if you do a very simple back of the envelope calculation, we are looking at a fiscal deficit close to 15%, not to 9%. So there is some either a deliberate or attempt or just oversight that does not show the full extent of the fiscal deficit. One of the big reasons for sovereign ratings falling is the incredulity of these figures. So it's going to be a tough year as far as interest payments are concerned. Of the 23 lakh crores that still remain, where is that 23 lakh crores going to come from? And here comes the biggest contradiction as far as the revenue budget is concerned. So just to go back a little bit, the budget has two booklets. One is called the expenditure budget and one is called the revenue budget. Expenditure budget is where we are going to spend money, and the revenue budget is where is that money going to come from. So in the revenue budget, we are saying that 23 lakh crores is what we are going to earn. How are we going to earn those 23 lakh crores? And as I said, that here is one imponderable, one huge issue that very few people, in fact no one is able to explain, and that is that we are looking at a target of 1.2 lakh crore of GST collections every month. You know, the reason I am stressing this is because last year, inexplicably, month after month, we got that 1 lakh crore of GST collection. In the worst months, remember, April and May, the world had come to a standstill. Your local barber was closed, but the GST collection was 90,000 crores. 4 days ago, the GST collections were 1,19,000 crores, a record. Now, what's going on? If there is no economic activity, and you can go and check it out, hotels are empty, there are no flights, there is nobody in restaurants, there is no construction going on. Why are people paying their GSTs? Who are these people who are paying GSTs? No answer. But the fact is that there has been a huge mop-up of GST realization, and therefore what the government expects is that it is going to collect little more of GST over the next 1 year, get about half that money through GSTs, get a 1/3 of that through direct income taxes, and then comes the other big announcement, and that is that we are going to the good old refrain that we are going to sell some public sector and we are going to earn 2 lakh crores from there. What is this public sector that it wants to sell? It is, lo and behold, it is Air India, that we have been hearing that it is off sale every year for the last 10 years, right? And LIC. So who's going to buy Air India? Who's going to buy LIC? Why is it going on every year after year? No answers to that. And then it says that it is going to sell 2 banks. Now, you know, this is a very serious issue. Which banks? Right? Is it going to be my bank or your bank? Which 2 banks are going to get sold off? And why this announcement of 2? Right? Why not, you know, 1.5 or 73 banks? I mean, there are 2 banks. Or is it going to be, you know, by darts that we are going to select those 2 banks? Are we going to toss for them? There is no explanation, but there are 2 banks that will be sold this year, and 1 general insurance company. So this is a big thing that is happening, and then comes another clause that says we are going to, and here's a very interesting play of words, we are going to monetize government land. Monetize, for all of you who understand English, in simple English means sell, right? So you are going to find railway land, airport land, defense land in cities getting sold. Now, is that how we are going to raise money? You know, if you see the budget, that is what seems to be the outcome.
Selling family silver.
Selling family silver, exactly. I mean, the crassest form of doing it. The final point I want to make is that when the finance minister went to the cabinet meeting, there is a tradition. You know, the budget thing has a whole tradition behind it. There is a halwa that is cooked and everybody eats it, and then the finance minister goes earlier with a leather briefcase, now with a red, last year with a red book, the Bahi Khata, and this year all the Atmanirbharta put aside and one tablet that she goes to this cabinet meeting which lasts all of 15 minutes and then comes and presents the budget. So as she was coming out of that meeting, which happens at about 10:30, 10:35, the stock market went up by 800 points. As she started speaking, it goes up to 1200. Halfway through her speech, it is at 1900. By the time she ends, it's at 2000. 2000 points increase in the Sensex. I don't remember in recent times that on a single day it goes up by nearly 3%. Why did that happen? Firstly, if on the budget day the stock market picks up, be careful, it is bad news. Because you know, if a budget is pushing up the stock market, it means it is doing everything wrong. The second point is that why does a stock market put its money into an economy which is at a standstill, which is contracting even by the finance minister's admission by about 7%, 8% this year, at least 12% according to other estimates. The answer is fairly simple. One is that stock markets around the world are doing very well. You will find that yesterday all stock markets went up. The second is that there is nowhere else to invest money today. There is no bank that gives you any interest rate now across the world. The gold prices are at a vulnerable high where you don't want to put too much money into gold. Land and housing prices are crashing every day, and therefore the only place to put money into in the hope of returns next year is the stock market. Now if we dissect that investment, you will find that most of that investment is going into Reliance. It's a very interesting thing that if you see most of the portfolio investment, which is stock market investment, is going to Reliance. Almost all the foreign direct investment that came into India, you know, last year, and the Prime Minister made this point that last year in the COVID year, we got a record high foreign direct investment. Why is everybody, there is no money anywhere, right? Then who is investing in India?
Actually, most of the investments came to Reliance Industries.
Only, not most. Yeah. All investments came to Reliance. The US invested in Reliance.
Facebook invested, Google invested.
Saudi Arabia invested, Amazon invested, Facebook invested, Cayman Islands invested.
Yeah.
All of them invest in one conglomerate, right? And a lot of that investment also comes from the same Chinese who are occupying Ladakh. So that is what is going on as far as the stock, the foreign investment, portfolio investment, and the foreign direct investment are concerned. We are getting that money, but it is coming to business houses, which are going to get severely, positively impacted by all this stress on infrastructure. So that's the thing. That is why I said, when I started in the beginning, I said that this budget is about land, because it is about land. It is about selling off land. It is about giving land for infrastructure. It is about giving land to a few big corporate giants who will use that land to build, you know, various things. It is about an infrastructure, an insurance sector that is again going to be occupied by these very large firms, and take a guess on who will buy those two banks that we are selling off. So that is the story of this budget, and that explains the fabulous increase in stock prices yesterday and today. My note of caution to all of you who are interested in making money in the stock market is that beware. It is not mere coincidence that stock markets have shot up so hugely everywhere in the world. You know, Japan is not certainly investing because in Japanese shares because Nirmala Sitharaman is reading her budget. The fact is that people are investing in stock markets because interest rates are very low. A slight correction in interest rates in the US and all these patriotic NRIs and foreigners will take their money and run. So be very careful. This, you know, this talk about Jhunjhunwala's talk about Sensex going to 1 lakh and others, KPMG etc. saying 55,000. Take that very with a lot of pinches of salt. Therefore, a budget that should have been about the poor this year. Right? At least we thought that this year the budget will be about the poor because it was miserable. Last year was really miserable. 2 crore people, by a very simple estimate, lost their jobs. At least 60 million people walked back home. At least 60 million people were added to the 100 million who sleep hungry every day. At least 100 million have gone back under the poverty line. We would have by today beat Nigeria as the country with the largest number of people below poverty line. Right? Nigeria was still about a week ago. To this country, we are giving a budget that simply talks about FDI in insurance, ports, airports, and insurance sector. That is the big issue with this budget. That is why you will find that a lot of people in the corporate sector are very happy. Most of the middle class, which is this 5 or 6% of India's population, is relieved because it saw no extra tax. However, what it fails to see is that there is a significant cess now on petrol and diesel. Petrol and diesel, which are already very high, the highest in the world, at a time when fuel prices are dropping everywhere. We have added 2.5 and 3.5 rupees on every litre. Where this cess is going to, why do we have cesses for state jurisdictions coming in and getting collected by the center is a mystery. And try and think of what happened to that Swachh Bharat cess, that Kisan Vikas cess, any cess that you can think of. Those millions of dollars collected, where are they now? That we are doing again, we are repeating that by putting this extra cess on petrol and diesel. So that is where I want to stop. If I try to look at what the budget did by way of contributing to the economy, something right it must have done. I find one item that went up significantly, and I think that is a very big step. It is the biggest hike that we see in drinking water. Quality of drinking water is responsible for most of the under 5 deaths that we see in India. India contributes nearly 26% of under 5 deaths. Note that India's population is 17% of the world's. So we have a disproportionate contribution to young children who die because of bad quality drinking water. We are giving enough money now, at least some money right now, to this comes from the Finance Commission actually. It's the 15th Finance Commission's pool. We have cut money on nutrition, we have cut money from the Women and Child Ministry, we have cut money, strangely, we have cut money on education. With a new education policy that got passed very recently, which said that India's allocation to education should go up to 6% of GDP, we cut the allocation from 1,98,000 crores to 1,33,000 crores. It's not a small cut, it's a huge cut. So drinking water seems to be the only thing where the government is thinking of spending more money. If the allocation to healthcare infrastructure actually translates into building those 17,000 rural and urban health centers, that will be a welcome thing. If it actually builds 3,400 labs across every district, that will be a welcome thing. But apart from that, this budget has been one of the most disastrous budgets, particularly in a year when we were expecting the government to do everything possible to take care of the poor who have been harshest hit, not just by COVID but also by the lockdown. Thank you.
But what is the layout for schemes like MNREGAs and other direct benefits?
Oh, very good. Yeah. So Manrega is also a very fascinating thing. You see, what happened last year was that as the migrant labor went back and as they lost jobs, the only sustenance they had was the Narega. And therefore you found that for the first time people had to be sent back because there wasn't enough money. There was 60,000 crores allocated to Manrega in the last year's budget, and we discussed that in our conversation, and the government then added 38,000 crores. So we had 98,000 crores for Manrega. We were expecting that now we will add a few more crores, but it's back to the old figure. It's back to the old figure, which means that a lot of people who are still left in rural India, who haven't gone back, and there are lots of them who haven't gone back, they will have no employment. In addition, there was this strong inclination, a strong feeling that the R will be dropped and that the Narega will also be extended to urban India. That has not happened. So that is right. Manrega is a huge disappointment, given that it was the only thing that helped the rural, so possibly our most robust scheme that helped those who got unemployed, and by God, crores of people lost their employment.
So, where has the layout increased? Because it appears that the budget is higher, but the allocation to all these things is low. So, there must be some place where more money is being pumped in.
Absolutely. So, all the money that has been given to this capital expenditure in the insurance, in the infrastructure sector. So, you will have a lot of money on. See, this is the ideological view, and it's important to understand this. What the government believes in, and here you can't fault. It's an ideology. It's an economic ideology. Thank you. Which is that if you provide X units of infrastructure, then a proportion of that will decrease poverty. There is this direct correlation between infrastructure investment and poverty alleviation that the government strongly believes in. Something that is not a very robust connection, but it has happened in a few stray places. The other thing that the government believes in, which comes out very strongly in everything that the survey says and the budget says, is that it very strongly believes that if you make the wealthy wealthier, then they will pass down some of those benefits to the poor. This is a theory called the trickle down theory, which got consigned to history books 100 years ago, but it is back again, and this is what the government very strongly believes in. Therefore, you will find that from the Prime Minister downwards, everybody talks about wealth creation. Respect the wealth creator. It's all about respecting the wealth creator, because if Farhan's income or return on investment goes up, then he will pay his employees a little more money. That's the assumption. What happens in countries like India is that Farhan has no reason to pay his employees more money, because he will get someone at lower rates if I go away. So therefore there is no reason, and that's why the divide keeps going up. Mukesh Ambani's net worth supposed to have gone up by 75% in the last 1 year, right? So a huge net worth of some $50 billion going up by $25 billion. That's like, that's how much disproportionate wealth accumulates. But that is what the government believes, that growth is the cure for poverty. Whereas what the other point says, the others believe, is that development is the cure to poverty. So therefore, you don't focus too much on development. You pay lip service to development, which is what you do by all these things, but really focus on growth. The whole worry is growth. Why is growth coming down? And that's why you will find every few days some cabinet minister says that we are going for a V-shaped growth. We are still waiting for it. Every day it says ki V-shaped growth is starting tomorrow. And the FM also said that V-shaped growth is coming, but a V-shaped growth doesn't come so easily. It's not, V-shaped growth is a rubber ball. You throw it and it goes at 45 degrees in the other direction.
Also, I mean, it is essentially a growth, of course, oriented budget, but you have to be very critical about what that growth implies, right? And it appears that the social sector and the social benefits are actually going to take a cut back and scale up.
Yeah. So, you know, on these growth calculations, there are a few things that we should all know very well. Firstly, that India's growth, which was an average of about 7.5% till 2016, starts dropping immediately after that. And we have had about 3 years of sliding growth. Mind you, this is the growth rate that is coming down.
Yeah.
It is not that the economy is shrinking,
Yeah.
but the growth rate, which was 7%, falls to 6, falls to 5, falls to 4.5. So by December 2019, our quarterly growth rate is down to the lowest ever in the last 35 years, which is a 4.5% figure. Pre-COVID. It's very easy to say that COVID got growth rates down. No, growth rates were down. We were going downhill even before COVID. COVID came and just, you know, destroyed whatever was left. It just sent it into a tailspin from a slide down. And post-COVID, it is not the growth rate that is going down anymore. The growth rate went to zero.
The economy is going down.
And now the economy started contracting. It is a negative growth rate. It has never happened. It has never happened. Therefore, if you ask for any economic model that says how is it going to work out, I don't know. Because there is no model that builds in contraction. We now have a huge contraction. The first quarter was a 25% contraction. There was only one other country which came close, which was the United Kingdom. Again, you will find that countries that were vulnerable. UK did a foolish Brexit and therefore it was sliding down. India did demonetization and therefore it was sliding down, and COVID came and helped it a bit. So we are going to contract by at least 9% this year. Contract, which means that if my salary last year was 100 rupees, this year it is not going to go up to 103. 103 is a 3% growth rate. It is going to go down to 92 rupees. Which means that I will have to cut down my food consumption. I will have to cut down the fees that I pay to for my children. I have to cut down their food. So that is what a contraction is, and that is what is going to happen now. This year it is going to contract. Next year, the finance minister says that we are going to see a positive growth. IMF says no. According to the IMF, it is going to take us 4 years to go back to pre-COVID levels. So for me to get back to my 100 rupees, it will take me 4 years. Then we will talk about growth.
And
so
the
there
will happen within this.
Yeah.
And the V will happen.
And so there is no question of a V. It is really like an L. So, you know, I mean,
So, I'm hearing 3 or 4 things in what you're saying, and I want you to comment a little bit on that. Number one, if I'm understanding it correctly, you're saying that COVID for this government or for this budget is a non-event.
yeah,
Right? It's as if it just never happened.
absolute. Yeah,
And whatever has happened is a one-time thing, and we have put aside a little bit of money for that. But we are counting on COVID not having any impact on our economy in the coming year.
yeah,
Right? And that's a very big if. That's number one. Number two, you're saying that we are actually selling off a lot of family silver.
yeah,
Right? And that family silver could be in the form of LIC, it could be in the form of land, it could be something else.
the two banks.
Basically,
Yeah,
banks, we're basically selling off a whole lot of things that may not have done a whole lot for us until now.
yeah,
They may have just been sitting in our treasure chests, but it is at least sitting there.
yeah,
Right now, I lose it, so I can't even bank on doing anything with it in the coming year.
yeah,
That's a big problem. Third thing that I'm actually worried about, this
Yeah.
is the one that actually worries the most,
yeah,
is that we haven't done anything at all about creating any employment assurance in our cities. Right? And we have said that this is about Atmanirbhar, not just Atmanirbhar, it is also about local Atmanirbhar. Right? That is the second part of this very important business. That it has to be about the local.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Now, to me, that means that the only way in which our cities, in the absence of actual fall in our real incomes, and in the situation where I have to survive locally, all I can count on is that there is going to be a local circulation of resources.
Yeah.
Right? And that in very simple terms to me means the kabadi wala.
Yeah.
Right? It's basically the kabadi wala economy that is going to keep people from dying.
Aman, can you just repeat that, because the mic would not have picked up what you're
saying.
Right? And I'm not saying that the kabadi wala economy is simply only about scrap. But it is about a certain kind of economy. It's the local informal sector, and it is about recycling and recirculating material goods locally.
Yeah.
Right? That's what keeps the economy going. What does this mean politically? Because big trend that we have been seeing from demonetization, right? All through politically, that the issue was about constructing a relationship with an individual citizen and the state. Isolate country. Right? I can't really have horizontal parallel relationship.
Yeah.
Anyone. I have to go and stand in the bank in a queue.
Yeah.
Right? The GST. I can't have a relationship with my state government. I'll have to have a relationship directly with the central government. Right? What does this mean? It's a contradictory thing, right? On the one hand, you're pushing people to survive only on the basis of what you can do for yourself locally.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you're pushing them out of all possible ways of building those relationships. What will this result in politically? Because this can actually be a very, very painful and dangerous situation for all of us.
All right. So, Anand's questions, 3 questions. One, the first 2 are very straightforward. Firstly, is COVID a non-event? Absolutely. I mean, short of just saying that COVID is a non-event, it's like those voices you hear when you go to local markets. Hey, COVID kya hai? COVID to ho gaya. Why are you wearing a mask? That's exactly the kind of statement that you are getting from the finance minister herself. That, COVID is business as usual now. As if COVID never existed. So that is the first thing. You are absolutely right. It just doesn't count. The world's biggest calamity. There has not been a pandemic like this. I mean, Spanish flu must have been like that, but we don't know. We don't have too much evidence on that. Second, family silver, yes, absolutely clear that there is no apology about selling out the family silver. In fact, it is so blatantly said. There is no justification even offered. Like the bank issue, can you just imagine that somebody gets up and says that I'm going to sell 2 banks? Which 2 banks? Why? There is nothing offered and nobody is questioned it. Nobody. Right. Your third question is the very important one, and that is on what the budget says, or why does the budget not say anything about employment? Anand, this is no economist answer. Right? This is just an answer from someone who's been watching this space carefully. And watching this also because some of us belong to that school that believes that the only thing that matters is jobs. Right? There is nothing else that matters. It is jobs. And if you see for the last 6-7 years, this one aspect is very assiduously being cut out. So much to say, so much that now the narrative is that if you are a national, you are a true patriot, if you are a job giver, the Prime Minister has said it several times, don't be a job seeker. It has come almost there that all of us who seek jobs are anti-national. So the whole belief that is being spread, the whole narrative that is being spread is nobody is going to give you a job, least of all the government. And we are not responsible if you don't have jobs. Go, create jobs. Now, this is a very dangerous thing. But the political impact of this, I have absolutely no clue. Because, I've never understood our politics, and over the last few years it is just completely baffling. I don't know if anyone has understood, at least for an economist who's always thought that it is all about the economy. one realizes that the politics and the economics go in two separate directions completely. Take this budget. All the infrastructure projects, yeah, this is one point that I missed out on. All the infrastructure projects that have been announced, and there are some handsome ones. The railways, for example, get something like 1,40,000 crores. Almost all that money is going into, take a guess, which states? Bengal and Assam, and one in Tamil Nadu. Which are these three states? Going for elections. It is so very obvious. It was so obvious that MPs in the parliament started laughing when she announced these projects. It was every bit of it was so blatantly political. So yes, the ignoring of the farm issue was such a strong political statement that it is these fellows from this state of Punjab who are creating this mess. We don't care. As if to give a message that you can do what you want. So the employment issue is going to be a very strange thing. And to your really excellent point about the local economy, you see what is happening now is that it is so obvious that the Indian investor is no longer interested in investing in India. Nobody is investing. Now if there is no local investment, who is going to give jobs? That job giver also, there is nobody left now. Therefore this whole emphasis on foreign investment. The only variable from which growth can come is foreign investment. That is why so much emphasis on the foreign investor. And that is why it is strange that a government that is seeking enormous amount of foreign investment as the only source of money, why is it rubbing the foreign investor wrongly? Why is it doing this kind of social sector mess? Because nothing drives away a foreign investor more than reading these headlines that say 2 people lynched there and 5 people killed there, or people getting arrested for falling in love with somebody of another religion or walking them home. That is the kind of news that is anathema to foreign investment. So that's the baffling thing, that there is this huge contradiction that is built in, and that is what will drive this slide in terms of jobs. The last point I want to make there is that there is another disturbing trend that is happening, because whenever there is a uber nationalism that is pushed, then you almost invariably have regional nationalism, and therefore you have the Madhya Pradesh government saying we are not going to allow non-Madhya Pradeshis to work in Madhya Pradesh, and therefore you have the copycats. Every state now says 75% reservation. Andhra government says 85% reservation for Andhras, and the UP chief minister, as always, does one better. He says that if you want to employ anybody from UP, you have to take my permission. So therefore you have this queer employment mess that is going to get created. Imagine the bureaucracy that will come in, that if you want to hire somebody from Azamgarh, then you not only have to contend with the local police who thinks all Azamgaris are terrorists, but you also have to contend with a chief minister who wants to know why you are hiring somebody from Azamgarh. So that tendency is going to get very strong. What it means in federal terms, in political terms, is completely beyond me. So thank you everybody for this session again. Thank you.